Ready to go?
Okay,
Right.
Catcher, take it away.
It is 12:01, and the Alternative Educator Preparation Application Review Committee is called to order. Helen, can you note the attendance rather than call the roll, because that's just so much more expeditious. Thank you all for being here, and in some cases making the drive up or down to Phoenix. Before us, we have just one item on the agenda today, which is the Secondary Educator Education Program application. If you recall, this committee saw that application at its first meeting and requested that the program bring it back, and the board, based on that recommendation, denied the application. And so now that application is back before this committee to issue a recommendation to the full board for consideration. Just as a reminder on how the scoring and such of this works, we have those evaluations that were sent out with those things for everybody to fill out, a couple of those in advance, and I appreciate that. Staff will calculate and average out those scores for each of those criteria, and then the committee can have some extra information on whether or not they would like to issue a recommendation to the board. Just as a piece of information, the board, based on this committee's recommendation, did approve Teachers of Tomorrow's elementary education application at the January board meeting. I'm sorry, some of them bleed together. So we will move on through. The first item on the agenda is the call to the public. We haven't received any requests for call to the public, but I think when we move to the next agenda item, we can ask the folks, representatives from Teachers of Tomorrow, to give a little bit of a presentation and answer any questions that committee members may have. So before we move on to that, are there any questions for me or for staff that we can answer before moving on?
Catcher, I have a question.
Yes.
I have the document electronically. Would it be helpful if staff had that while we're doing this piece of it, or do you want me to just hold it to the end?
Member Larson, if you could maybe just email it to me, if you have it electronically, whatever final version. We don't necessarily need a hard copy, but as long as I have it at some point before the committee's over so that we have some of that information, that'd be great. And I guess I should have also mentioned that I appreciate Member Larson being here as ADE's representative, and he may be here for our next meeting or may not be. We'll see, depending on who they would like to throw into the fire, and he can get out of it. We have not received any other applications thus far for alternative prep programs. We'll talk about that when we talk about future meeting dates, but so far this may be our last meeting for a while. So with that, let's move on to agenda item number 2, and I'd ask Mr. Saba and the folks from Teachers of Tomorrow to give a brief presentation, and then we can open up for questions from the committee.
Hi again. Thank you for reconvening so quickly, and since last time it was really our error in the application that we had to fix, and so we appreciate your patience in allowing us to come back and fix those and continue with this process. I'm going to be very brief because you've read everything. We've already talked about a lot of the things that we're doing. A couple of quick updates. We do have 82 applications for elementary so far, and we've admitted 3 people that are in the program and have started working in the program. We'll be at the Great Arizona Teach-In this weekend, and we have hired our Arizona director, Kirsten Flint, who lives here in Phoenix, will be our director and will continue to help both our candidates and meet with school districts on a continuing basis to understand what the shortage areas are, where the need is, and how we can connect and help fill that need. So also we have our advisor right now already working with candidates so that when people call in, there is somebody that can work with those people, help them understand the licensing process, understand exactly how things work, and keep them on track throughout that process. And immediately following the board meeting, the state board meeting in January, we were able to meet with Dr. Larson and his team to go over and make sure that we were in compliance with everything that we needed to do in order to stay in good standing with Arizona, including the reporting, including some of the research that we were going to have to do, as well as to make sure the process flow we had with our candidates would go smoothly with ADE. So we feel pretty good coming out of that. We were able to make some modifications to our program that had some low ratings based upon the conversation with them, where we're really clearer now on what we need to do. And that's an ongoing process, and we feel really great about the fact that we were able to open that dialogue so soon, right after getting approved, that they were so accommodating to sit down and say, okay, let's figure this out. Let's make sure we're doing things right. So with that, I will turn it over to questions, because you've already heard us, you've seen it again, so I think it's best just to move to questions.
Okay, do we just want to go down through the prompts? One prompt at a time?
Yeah, I think that worked out nicely last time.
All right. First prompt, I did not, accredited and licensed to operate. I didn't have any comments or questions on the group.
Nope.
The second one, areas of certification. What are the areas of certification? I did not have any questions there either. That was clear. It was mentioned. Somebody want to take the next one?
You just go for it, Kimberly.
The next one, financial stability. My comment was it appears to meet the criteria. I did wonder, how many teachers do you plan each year to be able to meet expenses?
To meet that 500,000, we would need somewhere around 100 teachers teaching in the classroom. So just over 100, 125 will get us to that 500,000 to cover the expenses that we have. We do invest a little bit more heavy in marketing in that first year because nobody knows who we are, and so we do a lot of digital marketing to just see what that market is. We'll sponsor things at the Association of School Administrators and the Principals Association just to really start to meet as many people as possible, so that once again, if a Arizona Teachers of Tomorrow candidate shows up at a principal's office, they're not like, I don't know who you are, and so that they're familiar with us. So we'll do a little bit more investment on the front end, and then we'll hit that steady state in the next year.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Next prompt is the program description. Providing a narrative that gives context and a big picture perspective to how the standard is met. And again, I had a question. The last item in the standard says designs and implements developmentally appropriate and challenging learning experiences. And maybe other committee members saw something that I missed, but I didn't see evidence that the modules cited led to the designing and implementation of challenging learning experiences. The modules present information about conditions and situations. Later on, there were modules that addressed that. Was that just something that I saw? Anybody else have any comments?
I thought it was more observation that would be taking place in reflective activities, but not necessarily implementation.
Okay. And as I said, I saw that in later.
Typically, and you're correct, it's probably not in there because that's, in my opinion, I was focusing more on learner development and teachers really observing and understanding how learners seeing and then saying, oh yeah, tying that back to what they know. But throughout, when they get into the very next module in planning lessons, that's when they begin to utilize what they've learned about learner development in planning those developmentally appropriate, challenging lessons.
Right. So I knew I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear from the company because I had marked it initially as approaches because that piece wasn't there when I went through it. But later on in the program, the activities were very clear, was explicit, the challenge was there. So I feel flexible about changing my 1 to a 2.
I would also add in the if you look in like the accommodations activity, so that really gets to that developmentally appropriate where they are having to, they're given 4 students and then they have to develop appropriate accommodations for those students. And the reason that we do it in that isolated way is because when they're trying to learn how to write a lesson plan, they just don't know. And you throw accommodations in there, and that's more. So we give them scenarios and say, what kinds of activities would be appropriate for these, so that when they do start doing the lesson planning, they're able to combine those.
I did have a quick question on this particular standard. This is a secondary application, and secondary is a fairly wide range.
It is.
So 712, the application speaks to having modules on adolescent development. Can you speak to it speaks about differentiation, but does it address the differences between an early middle school versus an upper level high school student?
It does, and a lot of the differentiation activities that they do when they're in the learning module itself, when they're doing the differentiation, they're given different strategies, and then they'll be given a scenario, and maybe that'll be an early middle school scenario, and then they'll take that same strategy and they're given an upper high school, they're given an English learner, they're given a student with learning disabilities. So they're given a lot of different scenarios so that they understand what that one strategy looks like for all those different groups. And sometimes it is, they'll use an example that is a PE example, and the next time they're using an example that is social studies or is math or is chemistry, so that, again, they're getting that wide range, wide view of what that looks like.
And as a quick follow-up question, because it answers a couple other questions that I had throughout, the application indicates that the candidates or the members of this, once folks are accepted, they will observe in locations that they would like to teach. Is there any counsel or encouragement provided to observe in that wide spectrum, so both at middle and at high school level, so that, because if they are certified, they could certainly teach in all of those areas?
To see all those different areas, yes. As part of their field observation report, they have to identify everything about the school. So they have to give a picture of that school. In the assignment, they're told, don't go to the same place. You need to try this type, an urban school, a suburban school, a school in your neighborhood, a school that has a high
middle
poverty.
And high?
I'm sorry?
Is middle and high school also designated as?
It is. That's part of it. We tell them that they have to look in different ones. We don't say specifically you need to go to 5th grade or 7th grade, but what we say is you need to have a diversity of learning experiences for yourself so that you are able to say, oh, I thought I wanted to teach high school and now I'm in love with 8th graders or whatever.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Okay. Moving on to standard 2. I thought the activities were thoughtful and comprehensive, but I do have a question. What happens when the candidates don't score the required 80% on the examination or effective on the projects? And I saw that throughout. So now how's that managed?
It's interesting in that we give them a couple of opportunities to score 80% on their assessment. When they don't, then the instructor reaches out to them and tells them specifically, these are the areas that you're missing. You need to go review this course. Same thing with the project. With each of the projects, we provide 3. I think with the projects, they get 3 times because it is so new for them. They receive to hit effective. And when they're doing that, again, if they don't hit effective, then the instructor reaches out and walks them through. And I would say in Texas, we have a large number of folks, and it's managed. I spend a lot of time, and members of my team spend a lot of time reaching out to folks and walking them through. We'll set up a quick webinar, or we'll do a Google Hangout with that person, so that some of the things that are a little bit more difficult when someone is not understanding it after multiple times, then we tend to find that if we can do a hangout with them and talk to them and do just like you would in a classroom where you're reading someone and knowing whether or not they're understanding it, that really helps.
So then is there criteria for candidates who have a pattern of continually struggling?
There is. Typically, we monitor their progress, and I do once a month. I run progress reports on all the assessments and all the projects, and I identify those people that are struggling. Sometimes it's because they are going through the program in starts and stops, and they forget. And rather than go back and review what they don't remember, they just charge forward on. And so that's sometimes what happens. Sometimes they just are not understanding the way it was explained to them. Now, for every person that's like that, there's a lot that aren't. So typically, though, that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. We're going to see exactly what it is that you need. We will give them additional resources. If it is writing an accommodation plan, we'll provide copies of accommodation plans for them. If it's something in methodology, we'll provide other options for them. But those instances really are few and far between. Usually when we reach out, when we get to that place, and we've reached out a couple of times, then they kind of get it.
Okay, I just envision some folks getting into this program and having a concern about being chronic underachievers and needing ongoing, continual help and support, and how the company addresses that. Because we can continue to help and support and redo and redo and redo all the way through all of your modules and all of your projects. So,
when do you dismiss a potential candidate?
When do we just dismiss? Is that what you said?
Yes.
You can be dismissed for a lot of different reasons. Academic integrity is one that
What
gets
about
them dismissed.
just not getting it, or they're just not performance?
Not getting it.
Yep.
Typically, we do what I did when I was a principal, which is I counsel them out.
Okay.
It is.
Do you all have a set of criteria for that other than the 80%? Like, what's the?
It's that. It's not really the 80% because typically they will eventually get that. It comes into play more often when we see not the projects where they're writing a research paper or whatever, but in that lesson planning when they just are not getting it. No matter what, they are not getting it. And we've worked with them, then typically we will start talking to them about, are you sure that this is what you want to do? We also find that when they are struggling like that, their interaction with us is less and less because, and they stop. They kind of, I don't want to say self-select because that sounds like we don't do anything, but we do see that. We see them begin to really fade away and not participate.
So would you say it's more of a decision based on just intuition over interacting with the person, or is there a set of criteria?
Right now, there is not a specific set of criteria. Right now, I would tell you that it does fall down to counseling them out when you have to. It's not pleasant.
No, it never is.
But it never was.
Thank you.
Can I just interject for two things? One, can we have your name for the record? I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I'm Ann Kuchera. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction.
And then to the second question that I think Member Aragon was hitting on is that process that you outlined for how the candidates are removed from the program. Is that process not enumerated specifically in the application?
In the handbook, we do not.
Okay.
It does talk about academic integrity.
It does talk about academic integrity, and actually I have sent 2 of those letters this month. So it is, we do it when they're copying and pasting their discussion answers. Come on.
Right. And I think that this process is not that much different than what our traditional EPP programs are doing. As the students go through the traditional coursework, it works about the same way.
One thing that I would say that's kind of nice is that we do tend to have the same instructor initially until we get a certain number of students. And so that instructor will be very familiar with those students.
I did have one question because it is similar to EPP, where there are folks watching, but because they're actually in the classroom with students at the time that they're going through this. And my impression would be that they would also be formally evaluated, similar to other teachers. What happens when there's a disconnect between what you all are seeing and what is they being seen in the classroom? I know that those evaluations are generally between the principal and the actual candidate. But how do the two flow together? If the principal who's evaluating or the other evaluators are seeing something different than over here and or put on an action plan or a assistance plan at the site, how does that communicated? Yeah, because I don't think throughout the year Human Resources is completely involved in that, which is who I'm assuming you all are directly working.
So when once an intern is placed in a classroom or they've gotten a job and they're in a classroom, we've assigned them a field supervisor. And that field supervisor works in tandem with the administration in that school. It's a large school. The principal may delegate that role to an assistant principal that supervises, or it may be the principal himself or herself, and they work together. And so the field supervisor makes contact first with the intern and also with the principal, introduces themselves, lets them know that I'm here supervising this person. They leave what they have seen, a written record of what they have seen with that principal. They reach out to the principal later and say, is there anything that we need to be working on together? So we see it as really like a stool of support, where we work with the administrator, the field supervisor, the intern themselves, and then if there is I believe the mentor teacher, if the mentor teacher has any engagement in that type of evaluative process, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But if they do, then we work with them as well. So it's all very goal-oriented, and if an administration is seeing issues with a teacher, then our field supervisor wants to be able to use the same language that administration is using so that they're hearing it from two different sources.
And Member Garcia alluded to this on the evaluations statutorily are confidential and can only be released to certain enumerated people in statute. And so there are some constraints on that. One allowance in statute is for the certificated teacher to make any use of their own evaluation, but it's pretty limited on who they can share it with. But, so that is a challenge, I imagine, not just for, in this case, but in other preparation program circumstances.
Although the teachers are all provided a copy of their evaluations that they could freely provide to you.
And we do have to have a good, strong relationship with the administration so that the administration will feel comfortable with us, and if they are seeing something different, then there are ways without divulging the intern's evaluation to say, maybe could use some help in classroom management, maybe this, maybe that.
I know the evaluation piece comes down a little later, but perhaps that might be one of the criteria that could be included, that the interns have to provide copies of their evaluations as part of your program, that it does not come from the school or the district, but that might be a criteria for you to consider if that could be presented difficulty.
I think that's very fair. That is what I would want.
Okay. Any other questions on Standard 2 then? No. Comments? On to Standard 3. Were there any comments there?
I have some questions for you on Standard 3. So can you tell me a little bit about how you differentiate the instructional strategies for management between your elementary and your secondary?
Yes. So with management, we begin talking first about theories and the different, that's the first course that they take. So there's a lot of different We tell them their tools in their tool belt, but we identify all those theories and the different strategies management strategies that go along with each of the theorists. At that point, then we do talk about in the coursework, this is more appropriate at the elementary level. This is more appropriate at the secondary level. I try and be a little sensitive to that because I was a secondary principal. I was a high school principal, and I didn't want my teachers to discard management strategies because they felt like they were elementary. Because what I saw was teachers not wanting students to engage in dialogue because they were afraid the classroom would get out of control with them talking too much. And so I tried to give them strategies, and that's what we try and do here. So we try and provide strategies and say this works very well in an elementary setting. However, in a middle school setting, it would look like this. And in a high school setting, it could look like this. So we give them different options of how it looks.
Is there a difference in courses that the teachers take?
There is not in the learning environment. There is not. They take, basically, there's a decision-making course that is basically all levels. So it'll say, Mrs. So-and-so is a second grade teacher, this is going on. And actually, I designed it purposefully that way because I want folks to understand the different types of management behaviors that they could see anywhere. It makes them a more well-rounded teacher than if they have spent their time only in secondary and don't really understand why elementary folks do the things that they do.
And then I just had a comment that I really liked the project that went with AZCR 600 Module 6, creating a culture of learning environment, a project where the candidates research and create a presentation targeting aspiring teachers with no classroom experience. That was very thoughtful. That was a good project, and I think you're going to get some nice differentiation. So by the time the candidates do this project, they're already teaching or not?
They can be or they might not be. It depends. The projects are something that they have to complete prior to the completion of the program. So depending on when they get a job, they may, some of their projects may be done before they get into the classroom, but they are not required to be done until they have completed. And so what I have found is the people that are in the classroom tend to turn in better projects. Right. And that's to be expected. They have a better frame of reference.
Okay. Any other questions on Standard 3? Go on to Standard 4. Content knowledge. I liked it that the literacy activities were varied and definitely appropriate for our secondary students.
Yeah, you're going to hear me ask this question, I think, a lot today. I noticed that I felt like the content appeared to focus on skill-based type instruction. I'm wondering how the course differentiates for knowledge-based subjects such as the sciences and the humanities, where you're not necessarily always teaching a skill, how to do something, but more of like knowledge. Can you talk a little bit about, especially like maybe one of your courses, AZTL 402, or module or a part of the unit of that, where you differentiate specifically for secondary teachers and show them how to demonstrate content knowledge, especially, and I think this even goes into Standard 5 with the application of content, planning, the types of lesson plans are being used, the types of execution that's being used, as opposed to, you describe direct instruction, you describe the 5E framework, but a lot of times those things are very skill-based. Can you talk a little bit about what this looks like for teachers who are teaching something that's a little bit more heavy on the knowledge?
On content.
Yeah.
It is not specific to content because they are taking content tests. So the assumption is that they have that knowledge base of their content area.
Okay.
Where it differentiates is in their methodology coursework, where it's very specific to what they are teaching and the tools of their particular trade.
Yeah.
In their lesson planning, part of the classroom observations that they do is they do go and observe teachers that are teaching in the content area that they hope to teach in if they don't already have a job, and if they have a job, then in their content area. And then they have to write a paper about what they saw, what was noticed, that kind of thing. It's called a structured observation form.
Sure.
So it asks them very specific things. What is specific in your content area?
Yeah.
And do you see something different in 7th grade that you would have not seen in 10th grade? Those kinds of questions are in there.
So I guess I'm still trying to understand, how does your instruction, to these candidates, your candidate-facing curriculum, I guess we could say, how does it show someone who is teaching social studies how to write a different type of lesson plan and take a different type of approach to a student than, say, a math teacher?
Okay. So initially, what we have found is that for career changers, they need to learn one way to write a lesson plan first, so that they understand the underlying what I'm doing.
Okay.
And then once they feel comfortable with that, then whatever is the lesson plan, science uses 5E a lot, and whatever is the lesson plan that is most used in their content area is what we accept when they are turning in their lesson plans. This is found in their methodology. This is found in their observations when they when they are observing in a classroom and they sit and listen to teachers in their content area plan. And then we ask them to make those determinations. But it is something that we recognize that, first of all, that they have to have the foundation, and then that secondly, where it is differentiated, we accept that. We don't force them into one way of writing those.
Okay.
Any other questions on Standard 4?
I just have a quick question about the Arizona College and Career Ready standards as it's written in the application.
I'm sorry?
I have a question about the Arizona College and Career Ready standards as they're written in the application. As you know, probably those standards in Arizona have gone through a number of revisions in the last couple of years.
Yes.
And currently, our K-12 Academic Standards Division has broken those out into specific standards per unit area or a specific area of content. So for example, in the AZCR 402, which is a study of those standards and their horizontal integration of those, is there a breakdown for Arizona specifically to how those standards are broken down?
It's written specifically for Arizona.
Okay.
So it is, we use exactly what you all have. And basically, we have to take them through, where do you find the standards? What are the standards? Why are they written that? I mean, you have to go through everything because we're starting at ground zero. And at that point, then, there are discussion questions where we ask them to go find your content area standard, find something, because, again, just teaching them where to find it. And then after that, throughout the course, that particular course, they're asked specific questions about their content area, how it's broken out, all of that. Because understanding how to read it is a huge task for them. Mm-hmm. They don't understand all those letters and numbers and dots in between them, and they don't understand any of that, and what they stand for, and why are these college and career ready? What does this mean? So all of that is explained to them throughout.
Okay, thank you.
Our goal with that particular course is that when they complete that course, that they will know where to find their content. They will understand that is the expectation of the state for what students will learn. And then from there, we build on that if this is what they want your students to learn, how are you going to get them there?
So as Dr. Larson mentioned, there are the Arizona standards are under revision. So what edition of the standards did you use for the course module?
This one probably was written, I would say it was written last summer, off the top of my head. But basically, we do a review annually on our courses. And so especially those that are very specific to a state, because states change all the time. What their state assessment is, what their standards are, it's always changing. So part of my team reviews every year.
And to that point, there may be some additional changes to the standards and the statewide assessment. So
I hear you saying that we should look sooner rather than later.
Yes, I think it would behoove your organization to put some. It sounds like you already have steps in place to make sure that you regularly check, or you can even check with the department or the board on some stuff. But I think that would probably be beneficial, as some of those things are more fluid right now.
Absolutely.
Right.
We'll
Perhaps more than once a year.
Yeah, maybe.
Seriously,
I agree.
undergoing the changes.
Especially with this going so much right now.
I would also add to that, also pay attention to the current statutory conversations that will likely have implications with EL learners, teacher evaluation, other things. So just making sure you keep your ear to the ground and have systems in place for addressing changes.
Will do.
Okay. Any other questions on Standard 4? You can go on to Standard 5. This is a standard that I noted that the projects and activities lean heavily on the content knowledge of the interns for the projects. Any questions? Comments?
Yeah, I agree. I think it does. I mean, obviously, it's going to rely heavily on the content expertise of the interns. However, just because someone is brilliant in chemistry does not make them a great chemistry teacher. I'm still kind of looking for you to tell me specifically how, maybe even a course or a module, AZMT 70X, for example, how does that train secondary teachers to effectively deliver secondary content?
The X stands actually means that it's a different number for each content area. So to use your example, there will be a methods of teaching chemistry. It may be part of a broader methods of teaching science, which is huge, but there will be a good chunk of methods of teaching chemistry that goes through the strands of chemistry and says, this is how we teach this. This is what we're trying to develop. Go look in your standards in the years before and see what they're supposed to know when you come in, and make sure you've taught them what they're supposed to know when they go out. And so it goes standard by standard for each of those content areas. The X just indicates that it's going to be a different number for each of the different content areas.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, good.
And then another question is, how do you assure that the candidates do not focus on just one or two of the special populations that are studied?
Again, it goes to that observation report. They're required to have diversity in all of the different areas. And so when they're doing their special populations, if they just focus on ELs and they've not done any study on poverty, or they've not done study on exceptional students or gifted and talented, then the work that they submit gets returned to them and said, this has to be, you have to have that diversity of experience. And we monitor that at the end of the program when they are telling us, okay, I'm finished with all of my stuff. Then we go back and say, no, you're not, because you didn't do these things.
Thank you. Any other comments? Standard 5? 5. All right, going on to Standard 6. Just a comment that it's nice to see the data having a requirement that the teachers are required to look at data, find the data, get the data, analyze it, and use it for planning purposes. There's also detailed coverage of structuring accommodations for the students who need them. That was another positive that was noted. Anybody have any other questions?
I would just say that one of the statements made in the application is that candidates are taught to use data to encourage student recognition of learning deficits and to set learning goals. I would also hope that as a part of this program and as a part of data analysis, we also look at the enrichment piece and what to do when students have achieved mastery of a content goal.
Yes, that I should have worded that differently, but yes, it does. Each of those we count, gifted and talented is part of the special populations, and so it is a constant theme running throughout.
But even like within a unit, if a student has, because students have different strengths in different units or with different experiences in schooling. So my hope is that within the program, as teachers are looking at data, if students have mastered, even within a unit, within a lesson, that we're looking to what can we do to push that student
to enrich. That is part of their data analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Standard 6. Standard 7, instructional planning. I didn't have any questions, specific comments. Nobody else? Standard 8, instructional strategies. I noted that the woven content from previous standards, and again, the teachers are becoming exceptionally familiar with their original 5 lesson plans, and how those lessons and the concepts continue to spiral back and on each other, and just so that they become more familiar, rather than always looking at new content, new lessons, trying to add more information, that they're using what their prior knowledge to further enhance. I appreciated that kind of building structure.
Thank you.
For teaching these complex concepts, because they're writing lesson plans when they're teaching, when they're in the classroom, they're writing lesson plans every day to move the content forward. And I think this is also helpful for those engaging in summer programs. As another question, does this program run year-round? It is. Is it continual? How often do the modules start?
They're asynchronous, so a student can begin their learning journey at any time.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments?
Nope.
Standard 7? Mm-hmm. Standard 8? I'm sorry, did we just do standard 8? Yeah, standard 9. I didn't mark that off. Standard 9? Any other questions about that?
I just had a comment on that one that I appreciated as well, that the evaluation observation protocol includes opportunities for the candidate to self-reflect on their practice. Even lots of times in our own LEA evaluation models, we don't have that as an included piece. So I appreciate that that's included in there.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Standard 10, leadership collaboration. My question on we see the structured field-based observation form, and the lesson planning is about observing collaboration. But where is there a rating of evidence for candidates to engage in collaboration? You have collaboration with families is covered, but where is there evidence of the interns actually engaged in collaboration themselves?
That is something that's found in the field supervisor report when the field supervisor is doing their observations in the classroom, and as they are going at coaching and doing all that, that's where that is identified.
Are there opportunities for the candidates to collaborate with each other as a part of this experience outside of an online environment?
We don't necessarily set up something outside the online environment, but they are allowed within the online community to form groups to work together on projects if they choose to do so. Oftentimes, one of the things that I really enjoy is going in and looking to their responses to discussions. And there's a lot of collaboration in those discussion questions because they're required not only to reply to whatever the prompt was, but they're also required to reply to 2 of their peers. And so you get very thoughtful responses and interns saying, that's a really great idea, I hadn't thought about that. So it is simulating as much as possible in an online environment what you might get in a face-to-face environment.
Catcher, I have a question, and I apologize, Anne, that I'm not recalling the element in the field supervisor report about collaboration. Is it possible to pull that up in the application?
I believe it's part of, in their professionalism, there is because we use the model, our field supervisors use the model that are the teacher evaluations. And so because of that, there's a place in there, I haven't looked at it in a bit, but I believe there's a place in there where it talks about professionalism and leadership and collaboration, and I believe it follows this standard 10.
So are you talking, is that the bullet form in your program supervisor report under forms, or are you talking about the Maricopa County, the Maricopa County Learning Observation Instrument report?
I want to say that those are aligned. Do you? Yes? They are supposed to be aligned. That's typically what we do, is we align whatever if there is not a state evaluation instrument, we use something that looks like all of them, that we can kind of hit all of them. Okay. And then we tend to align that. That supports that communication between the field supervisor and what's going on at the school too. So they're hearing that same language. Because
I do know that is contained in the professional segment of the Learning Observation Instrument, the Maricopa County Education Service Agency evaluation form that's used in their documents. And under professionalism, collaboration is there. So, okay.
We've just seen in some of our work with alt-cert folks that are coming in on internship certificates, without the foundation of experiences, sometimes they struggle with the reflection piece a little bit in terms of being able to draw the same conclusions. They need a little bit more scaffolding and support, and I just have a concern about that solely being done as they're in this formative learning process and as solely in an online environment. So,
I hear your concern. I think because the program does build, it is very much a scaffolding program, and because they're not only asked to reflect once or twice, that is an ongoing process throughout the program. The instructors asking questions, probing questions, leading them to where we want them to eventually be. I know that working with teachers at all different levels, some are career changers, and some have been in the classroom for 25 years. The ability to be reflective and to come to good conclusions about maybe what happened or what we can change, and that whole thought process is one that evolves over time. And I think that what my goal is in the initial aspect of introducing this is that we teach them from the get-go to be reflective so that it becomes second nature to them. And we know that from research that our very best teachers are reflective in nature after almost every interaction. So that's what we're going for.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you remind me what your retention rate was during the first year?
I'm sorry, I could not tell where the voice was coming from. The retention rate?
Yeah, so what percentage of your candidates quit during their first year of teaching?
That's around, it's only about, the quit is around 7%. So we have 93%, and then 70% are retained after 5 years. So we have a really solid 5-year
but
retention.
Actually within the first year, not at the end of the first year, but during the school year.
Within the first year and not asked to come back the second year, that's 7%.
That's around 7%. How many of your teachers leave during the middle of a year, like in the middle of their contract?
It would, we're only losing about 2%, so it would be about 5% then would be leaving in the middle of that first year. So 2% are leaving at the end of the year and not asked to come back, or not asked to come back.
What is your approach if someone calls you up in, let's say, December of the first year of teaching, and they're like, I want to quit, I can't do this? What do you do?
They are, they are strongly urged at the very beginning when we talk about professionalism to understand that they are signing a contract and that they have a contractual obligation to fulfill that contract. So we can't stop everyone from quitting. But we discuss with them the penalties. This is not just you quitting a job. This means that you will not complete your certification. This means that this avenue will be closed to you. What can we do to support you so that you feel more successful in the classroom? And so, it's going to happen. I've had a physics teacher.
Absolutely, yeah.
Most of them, because we see all the reasons why, and most of them are some sort of change in their life circumstances as required. Some of them are moving, they have a health issue, good and bad. So
those are understandable, yeah.
There's all of those, so we're really not seeing a large majority of them. We're
just not like, I can't do this.
Yeah, I just can't do this.
Okay.
We do see that in the field experience before they get into the classroom.
Sure.
I mean, when you look at our pipeline, we lose a lot of people in that first phase that go, okay, that's not what I thought it was.
That's fair, yeah.
Which is why that's so important.
That's when you want them to go.
Okay.
Right.
That's when you want them to go.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like them to figure that out before they
We're happy when they figure that out.
Yes.
take that commitment.
And that's why the business structure of the program, I think, works too, because they're only paying that $395 up front. So if they decide then, it's not like they've invested thousands of dollars and then found out it's not right for them. It allows them to find that out and then leave and not feel like they have to keep going because they've invested all this money.
Thank you. Any other questions on that standard? The next one, the application and review process. Any questions there?
That's not me.
Don't have any questions on there. The enrollment application forms, they were there.
Fine. I'm good.
As described in the documents. Districts and school participants. At the time of the application was submitted, there are 9 school districts were identified. That's more than you had the last time. Can you add to the 9? Have you been able to add to the 9 yet?
That's why Kirsten has been hired, because that is her sole focus and job, is to now continue to go out. It was why when we were here meeting with Dr. Larson that we went to, we saw that the Arizona teach-in is this weekend, so that gives us a chance to go around and meet everybody all in one time. So we've got 3 staff coming to go meet with all the districts then and continue to build on those partnerships and make sure they understand what we do and how we do it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions? The next one, describing the length of time the candidate will be required to participate in a supervised program. The only question that I had here was what criteria used to determine a candidate needs more than minimum observations. And that's been covered, I think, in our conversations.
Oh, if they need more than 3.
More than the minimum.
Okay, yeah. Typically that comes from the administration of the building.
Right.
That's because when we're leaving our observations, we have the follow-up email. They typically will let us know that we need to come visit some more, coach some more.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Explaining the structure and supervision evaluation of the school experience. I didn't have any questions, comments. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Nope.
It's clear. The next item, promoting the effectiveness of the candidate. There's evidence, I noted evidence of support and remediation plans, and it also explained the recommend or not to recommend process. And then you've explained that even more as you've answered other questions from the group. Anybody have any other questions?
No.
The forms, well, I looked at that and had to trust that you had all the right forms. The forms that were there were the ones that were discussed previously in other places in the application.
That's fine.
Anybody think of any others that I wasn't thinking of adding any. So that was fine then. Staff roles and responsibilities. The only question I had was the location of the Senior Executive, Director of Operations, Director of Curriculum Instruction, and I'm guessing you're all in Texas?
Yes.
And then the Director of Certification and Compliance, is that person located in this state?
No, initially they will be in Texas too. As we continue to build the program here and the revenue here, then we'll be able to have more and more people here. Sure. So initially the director will be here, the second person will be the advisor, and obviously the instructor and the field supervisors will all be here. And then as we get bigger and bigger, we tend to move there. But right now the people with the most expertise on how to certify people are in our main office that have been doing this for years and years and years in Texas and have opened up these other states. We need that knowledge base to be in charge initially here, because it is not something you could just pick up on the fly.
Right. Thank you. Any of us have any other questions? Describing the statement from the length of time a candidate enrolled in the program will complete the program. Any other questions about that?
Nope.
Is there success and evaluation tracking?
No
I didn't have any
concerns.
comments there. That was evident. Yep. Providing documents is provide the tracking and evaluation documents.
That's fine.
That was fine. Mm-hmm. Was that fine for the? Mm-hmm. Okay. The program success. That was description. I didn't have any questions. Any questions on that?
No question, just as a comment, as noted by other folks up here, I think it's really important that you continue to stay very close to state board decisions as well as the state legislature with regarding ongoing program evaluation and modification.
And that was we spent a majority of the time when we met with Steve and his team that on how that is evolving and what they're using and what they would like to see. And so I think that was a very productive discussion to make sure that we're following as those rules are developing, that we're in immediate compliance with those. So thank you. But yes, they've been great to make sure that we're able to do that.
Thank you.
And I apologize. May I go back to the tracking documents?
Absolutely.
So two of them, and I believe they were the only two that didn't have links, were ADE documents, interestingly enough. We have our first actual biennial report meeting with our EPP programs Friday, and on the agenda for that is for us to look at candidate exit surveys, which will hopefully be developed at the close of that meeting. So hopefully we'll have a link to one of those. The principal surveys we're still working on.
Yeah.
So.
And that was part of our discussion. Is we have them, but we would rather have the same ones so that everybody can look and see how we're doing compared to all the other programs.
So then, to that question, my last one will be, who in your organization will be the person identified to maintain connection with Arizona Department of Education, our State Board of Education staff, to monitor the changes? As has been mentioned, our state legislature is exceptionally involved in education practices now and procedures and how we do what we do, what the requirements are. So who in your organization is going to be involved with us here in Arizona and keeping your finger on that pulse and knowledge base?
She wasn't listed because she wasn't hired yet, but Kirsten Flint is a Phoenix resident who she started on Monday. Will be at the teach-in. She's in Houston training right now, but she will be in charge of monitoring that, coming over and meeting with the certification team. We also have them come to the state board meetings and make sure they check the agenda and see what's going on, and so that they can keep us informed. So she is our Arizona director that will be here and on site to keep track of all those things.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Catcher, I've submitted updated scores, just in case you didn't see that in your email.
Thank you, Member Aragon. Yes, we did. I did get that. Thank you.
I don't have an electronic device, but I have mine ready for you.
Thank you. Yes, and so if there aren't any further questions, then maybe we could do what we did last time, maybe take like a 5 or 10 minute recess, allow me to compile some of this stuff, and then I can provide the results, and then we can discuss what kind of recommendation the committee wants to make. Does that sound
Sounds good.
Okay,
Sounds good.
so we'll go into a recess, tentatively come back at 1:05.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
on. So I'm going to go to that because our ELL bills.
Okay, members, it is 1:09, and the Alternative Educator Preparation Application Review Committee is back in order. After compiling the committee members' evaluations, the average unweighted score is a 1.99 for the total program score. The only category that had a consistent not meets among two members, more than one member, was standard 10. And so that's something that this committee can recommend if it sought to recommend approval, could recommend that the applicant addressed in their biennial report to ensure that they address that potential deficiency. And so if there is further discussion, we can, of course, have further discussion or questions or comments. Otherwise, I can provide a draft motion, and then the committee can consider that.
So I think maybe we should have that discussion. Is this, are the concerns of the committee members on Standard 10 significant to hold up this process and have them and have the company resubmit?
No.
I mean, Madam Chair, I think that we mentioned a little bit about the collaboration. I'm a second career educator as well, and coming from outside of working in schools, the ability to collaborate is one of the most essential things for me that I had to learn how to do. I had worked in a profession where it was kind of like you do this, you do this, you do this, and then you get evaluated on just you. And collaborating not only with parents, but also more importantly with your team, especially I think in the middle school. I think in high school it's a little bit different because you're departmentalized more so than in the middle school. If I didn't have the skill set to collaborate for what's best for the child, instructionally and standard-based instruction, it really falters the process for me. And I did not do my second. I did not get my credential online. I did it in a traditional program, and I learned that through the program, how to sit down and collaborate. And so that's where, and even more so in my role now, I see that with new teachers coming in that have not had a chance to learn that practice, that it actually stalls. If you're in a team meeting, for instance, with all the ELA teachers, and there's one teacher who's just not speaking, it really does not add to their growth nor to the children's best interest. So I think that's I don't think it's a concern for me not to vote for, but I think it should be something to be on the lookout for, especially with the turnover being so horrific in this state, which is different than other states, and the novice learners that we have in there. I think that's where I was, and but I hope that it can be something that is addressed, and even more so critical when you're looking at what's coming back and any interaction that you have with the administration.
I absolutely concur with what Committee Member Garcia said. With some of our new folks, we actually have to provide even language frames in order to help them understand how to approach conversations involving team-level data, how to approach conversations about exchanging best practices, how not to take data personally, and some of those things. And those are it's very difficult, and I'm struggling to imagine how that could be achieved in a solely online environment. And so I would encourage that as you consider program review, that elements of those collaboration activities can be embedded within the program in order to strengthen this skill, a much needed skill.
And then to that, as you are taking your interns through that learning observation instrument, traditionally the professional piece is done at the end of the year, but if that is brought out at the forefront, at the beginning of the intern experience, and the intern and their program supervisor can be doing, along with the building administrator, doing checks as they go, I think that will help really significantly with the collaboration piece and alleviate some of those concerns that the committee has and is going to be faced then once you actually get started and you've got interns placed in the field.
Can I add one more thing that was a concern for me is that being very acutely aware that mentorship programs are few and far between at this point. They are voluntary on school sites with budget cuts. It's one of those places where they're going very quickly. Coaches have kind of transformed into not only instructional coaches, but also just a general mentorship. And because a lot of the program does talk about the ability to just be with the principal, to interact with the principal, and the hope that there would be a mentor, that is very quickly going away. I know our district has little by little cut it out, and I'm in one of the school districts that have been on there, in Isaac School District. And I heavily relied on my mentor to help me through just where the copier is, where the bathroom is, and stuff like that. Those are gone. And we are finding that is a big issue. So to be maybe aware of the fact that it would be in our best interest to have mentors everywhere, but the reality is that those are going away.
I have a question, Catcher. And this is more directed towards the committee itself and how we operate. Is this an appropriate time to bring that up, or is there a place to meet just with the five of us to do that? Or should I just address that in now?
Member Aragon, I guess for clarification, to bring up
right
what exactly.
Yeah, no. I just I'm hearing a lot of concerns from members about certain things about collaboration. Yeah. But there's no motion on the table either to approve or deny the application. And for me, what I don't want to do is sit here and say, hey, you should think about this, you should think about this, you should think about this, because that's actually not my job. That's your job. My job is to say, is there evidence right now in front of me to say this should be approved or this should not be approved? And so I think it's more beneficial to me as a member to say, there's a motion on the floor to approve this, there's a motion on the floor to not approve this, and then let's debate as to whether we want to approve or disapprove. Because after hearing some of the concerns, I'm like, well, maybe we should debate that with the motion on the floor, because what I don't want us to do is say, we have all of these concerns, let's just approve anyways. So that's my concern, kind of like hearing, we're not sure if I'm hearing people say, like, we're not sure if you're considering these things or you should consider these things. And that's making me say, well, okay, maybe then does the organization need to go back and consider those things? So that's why I'm just wondering, in terms of how we operate, if it makes more sense to say, let's put if your opinion on the council or on the committee is, I want to move forward with this application, make your motion and we'll debate it. If your opinion is, I don't think we should approve this, make your motion and let's debate it. So that's what I'm thinking.
Member Aragon, members, that's a good point. I think that is something that the committee can do. I think another option is that a motion can be made. Whoops, sorry, my chair just sunk down. A motion, only the best seats and chairs here at the state of Arizona. A motion can be made to, if the committee wanted to approve, a motion could be made to approve and to direct the applicant to address some of those concerns.
Okay.
So that's one option that the committee has, and those concerns can be addressed in the biennial report. If the committee went down that route, we don't have to rehash all the specifics and make sure all of that's in a motion. We could say, as noted before, and then I can work with committee members to make sure that I encapsulate the concerns. But I think procedurally, you bring up a good point in that perhaps if we are now beginning into the discussions about whether we want to approve or deny, it would be appropriate for a motion to be brought forward. And the motion that a committee member could make, and rather than trying to worry about how to repeat or read my chicken scratch from what I give you, you can always just ask for it to be so moved and then seconded, is that the Alternative Educator Preparation Application Review Committee recommends to the board the approval of the Alternative Educator Preparation Application of the Arizona Teachers of Tomorrow Secondary Education Program, and that the board require the applicant to address the deficiencies identified in the evaluations and as identified by committee members in its biennial report.
So moved.
Seconded.
And is there any further discussion? Because now would be the time, because next we're going to vote.
So do we need to address specifically what we want them to address?
I think, yes, if there's
Okay.
anything additionally that you have not already touched on, then I think now would be the time to ensure that that is included in the
minutes.
motion and in what the committee would recommend that the board direct the applicant to identify in its biennial report as concerns to address.
So I think standard 10 is going to be the one that we're going to specifically focus on, increasing the strength of collaboration experiences and increasing the development of one's skill in collaboration would be the area of concern at this point.
And we also want to add evidence of collaboration in there?
Yep.
And that will be in addition to those other concerns that Member Garcia and Member Reedy had brought up before.
I agree. Speaking to the motion on the floor, I want to make sure that what I stated before was included in there. I think it was included because, as Mr. Braden brought up, is that this was one area, and then when the chairperson asked for us to speak about it, that's where my words came in. So now that it is on the floor, if you could please add those to there appropriately. That's it.
Absolutely. Okay, so members, the motion on the floor is to approve the alternative educator preparation recommend approval of the alternative educator preparation application of the Arizona Teachers of Tomorrow secondary application, and also to recommend that the board require the applicant to address those deficiencies, specifically standard 10, and also those identified by Member Garcia and Member Reedy. And so with that, we can do just a voice vote unless a member would request a roll call vote. So all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Appears the ayes do have it so ordered. So with that, that concludes agenda item number 2. This will go in front of the board at the March board meeting with the committee's recommendation for approval and to recommend that the board require the applicant to identify those deficiencies. For agenda item number 3, future meeting dates and items for future agendas. As I had mentioned previously, we have not received any other alternative educator applications. So right now we don't have a date set for our next meeting. I also do want to remind this committee that this committee does not only review the alternative educator prep programs, but there's also that new classroom-based prep program that was established in statute and in rule. We have not received applications on that, but we have received some inquiries about it, but those would come before this committee as well. And then finally, one other thing I did want to mention is that depending on how legislation forms in this legislative session, it's possible that depending on the outcome of that, this body may end up being dissolved because those functions shift in some way. Or one thing to keep in mind is that there is a bill that would rename alternative preparation programs as post-baccalaureate programs. And so this committee, we may have to rethink how it's structured or how we review applications, or at least the name would have to change if that were the case. So just something to put on your radar, and of course we'll be in communication on any of those outcomes. So with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
What's the date of the March board meeting, please?
It is March 26th, as Kellen reminds me.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, if there aren't any further questions or discussions, we will adjourn at 1:24. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.